Hello, class, and welcome back. Today we are going to cover Chapter 3 and basically find out what it's like to be a cultural anthropologist. So, and what exactly is fieldwork? Fieldwork is the standard research method of cultural anthropology and is based off of doing one's fieldwork and then ethnography. The fieldwork refers to the prolonged period of time spent living within the culture the anthropologist is studying. The ethnography is the final written description of that culture. Anthropologists have conducted fieldwork and written ethnographies about cultures from all across the globe. Fieldwork definitely begins with people. As a rule, the focus of fieldwork is people. These observations and interactions are used to describe and understand a foreign culture. Although anthropologists may make use of surveys and other external data, they highly value the interacting directly with people. Malinowski was stuck in the Trobriand Islands for a year because of World War One. During that time, he decided to go ahead and study the people that he was right there with. One of the things that he came up with was the participant observation. Instead of doing what we call armchair anthropology, he actually got in and decided to become part of the society. Um, well, to a small degree. Um, but chapter 1 of your book proposed the basis for fieldwork today was based on Malinowski's work. You also have Margaret Mead, who's the one who said that cultural norms are culturally specific. You'll hear me talk a lot about Margaret Mead. Okay, so for fieldwork, you definitely need some intuition. That definitely comes in handy. Um, it's a lot of serendipity, in all honesty. Culture shock. Culture shock is something that most definitely happens. With anthropologists, we have it twice. One, when you first enter the community of study, and again, when you return home. This is because you've indoctrinated yourself and enculturated yourself within a community, and then you come home, and it's completely different. Um, from my own time away, I went to Scotland, which, yes, they speak English. Yes, it's a lot like the United States, but there are those subtle differences that did make me kind of freak out a little bit. And it's the small things, like they don't have regular Doritos. Just something as simple as that can really play with your head. Um, there aren't the same food or social trends. You don't do, unless you do takeout immediately, there are no doggy bags. You can't take your leftovers from a restaurant home. That's considered rude. So, and then when I came, as well as the whole driving on the other side of the road thing, which, yeah, not a goodness. When I first got there, but I found myself when I got home trying to drive on the other side of the road. So there is a slight culture shock, and then I went to get tea and there wasn't good tea, and yeah. So anthropologists may be living with and interacting with people who live difficult lives. With such close interactions, often of a strong emotional nature, it is impossible for fieldwork not to affect an anthropologist. An all-accompanying nature of ethnographic work often results in culture shock, that is, an overwhelming feeling that nothing is familiar, that everything in one's life is different. culture shock is coming home has led many anthropologists to reflect on the oddities of their own culture. And it's kind of like what we did with the Necromia article. So, fieldwork allows anthropologists to see our own culture and how it might be considered exotic or strange, which helps us to avoid the ethnocentrism that is very hard to deal with. Um, what is unique about an ethnographic fieldwork, and why do anthropologists conduct this kind of research? Fieldwork is a social science, and it is definitely an art form. There's a lot that relies on the anthropologist's intuition as well as serendipity and chance. Um, I will definitely say that while I was over in Scotland studying video game tourism, the handheld Harry Potter game came out while I was there. And I just happened to be at Anna Castle during that time and talked to some people. And I was able to come back about a month later and spend a good week and a half as a broomstick flying training instructor trainee. So I was able to get a lot more data then. Um, and that was just by chance. That was just being in the right place at the right time, having the right things happen. And I wouldn't have been able to do that otherwise. And so, in other words, skills aren't so easy to teach or learn because they aren't so cut and dry. That's why some people also refer to fieldwork as an art, because it's very interpretive, subjective in many ways. So if there aren't a lot of things out there saying how to do fieldwork, because it really does come down to being in the right place at the right time and being able to take advantages of things when they come up. As my mentors told me, never say no, always say yes. So, in general, we humans do not always pay attention to everything around us. That is very, very true, especially if we're in a comfortable situation. There are buildings and people we just walk right by and never look at. Going into a new culture helps us see those differences because we're on edge and we're hypersensitive and hyper focused of everything around us. So, this method of fieldwork used by anthropologists is equally valid in our own daily lives. An overall goal of this course is to help you learn to think like an anthropologist, to examine what seems normal and see how it's actually unusual, to see all the people who affect our daily lives and all of the lives that we affect. During the semester, you should think about how fieldwork and thinking like an anthropologist can inform your daily life. There's a very long history of Europeans encountering and describing people from other cultures. Today, Herodotus is often described as the founder of modern history because of his writing on the history of his fellow Greeks. But he also traveled abroad to Egypt and other foreign nations. While there, Herodotus wrote detailed description of these foreign cultures. These descriptions largely focused on how foreigners were different from Greeks, that is to say, less civilized. Still, these descriptions give us some of our oldest descriptions of other cultures, which differ strongly from the description of one's own culture. This tradition continued on through many explorers, for example, Marco Polo, Christopher Columbus, and a litany of Spanish conquistadors. By the 19th century, travel around the globe was quickly becoming faster and easier. As a result, there was a noticeable increase in the number of Europeans traveling the world. Consequently, there were also an increase of written description of people around the world. Out of this increase in description of foreign cultures came the origins of our fieldwork of anthropology. The earliest anthropologists, such as Sir E.B. Tylor and Lewis Henry Morgan, pored over the descriptions coming in from all around the world. They didn't actually go out into the field, but they had other people who did it for them. Thus, we call them armchair anthropologists. Today, these early scholars would be called armchair anthropologists. They never left the comfort of their own home, but instead relied solely on other people's reports. However, their work led to our first understanding of the culture concept. We saw that E.B. Tylor was the first to define culture. He formalized the initial ideas of culture involving a series of stages from simple to complex. Interest in anthropology grew, and knowledge of global cultures grew. There was an increase for pushing the professionalization of the field and developing more sophisticated research methods. New scholars sought to move past the discipline's armchair origins. They advocated for the studying other cultures in person. These scholars also sought to move beyond the early ideas of a strict unilineal cultural evolution. So, Franz Boas is one of the early advocates. He worked in the late 1800s. He was interested in mainly Native American culture and helped lead to the development of the modern four-field approach within anthropology. Boas saw that Native American cultures were rapidly disappearing and under the expansion of the United States. He thought anthropologists should work rapidly to record as much as possible about Native American culture groups while they still existed. This holistic approach to the recording of Native Americans helped lead to the modern four-field approach, which includes cultural anthropology, linguistic anthropology, physical anthropology, and archaeology. He became a vocal proponent for the cultural relativism, the centerpiece of modern anthropological ethics. Cultural relativism is defined as all cultures are considered equal to one another and can only be judged by their own merits. Bronislaw Malinowski, he followed on the heels of Franz Boas. Malinowski further aided in the development of anthropology by establishing ethnographic fieldwork as a standard within the field. After his experience living among the islanders, he was convinced that the only way to truly learn about a culture was to live among his neighbors. In his ethnography, Argonauts of the Western Pacific, he wrote passionately about the importance of fieldwork and participant observation. The idea of not just watching people, but taking part in their daily lives. So, how do anthropologists really get started within doing their field work? Really seriously, we do a lot of preparation. Before any type of field work can be carried out, there are principal steps of preparation. So you first have to go through your primary literary review. Before you can study a culture, it's vital to read up as much as possible about the region and any previous work done there. This background research will allow it to aid you in further studies. Prior research may save you the effort of repeating the study that has already been done. It also behooves you to know some of the cultural normativities that have already been written, as well as how they will interact or take your research. Fieldwork also requires funding. Ethnographic fieldwork may not cost as much as a medical lab. Nonetheless, anthropologists are constantly on the lookout for funding. Trips to the field sites can be costly. Equipment, such as voice recorders for interviews, can also cost a lot. Grant applications are a regular part of preparing for fieldwork. Finally, anthropologists must receive permission to carry out their work. The most important permission must come from the community of study. While one plans a year-long period of research within the community, it is not advisable to simply show up unannounced. Many preliminary trips are often required to choose a site study and receive appropriate permission. Depending on where in the world one is working, an anthropologist may also find it necessary to apply for permissions from local and federal governments. This is most definitely true. We also have to get consent from an IRB. I have a copy of mine on this PowerPoint somewhere. And so it's an institutional review board. So the next is strategies. Once one enters the field, there are many strategies that can be used. Many anthropologists take as their goal to create thick description, as advocated by Clifford Geertz. Thick description refers to detailed description, which affords a deeper insight into the underlying meaning of words and actions. Anthropologists are not looking for the surface appearance, but the deeper meaning. Let's look at the different strategies and concerns towards finding deeper meaning. One is the understanding of what kind of data we're working with. Quantitative data is based on numbers and any that can be quantified. Number of people, number of transactions, number of times one interacts with a village elder, etc. Qualitative data represents the information that cannot be counted, such as life histories, personal stories, or religious doctrines. Quantitative data is good for the understanding of large family or community, analyzing economic transactions or how long certain events last. Quantitative data is the hard backbone of our research. Quantitative data helps provide thick description, which Clifford Geertz refers to. Anthropologists often develop particularly close relationships with members of the community who become their key informants, or someone who advises the researcher on the community and provides some insights. Key informants can help anthropologists set up and conduct interviews, one of the most common qualitative data collection methods. Interviews can range from informal to formal. In some cases, anthropologists might elicit a life history or a sort of a biography of a community member, which in turn can be used to eliminate changes in the wider community. Some of the quantitative data collection methods include surveys and network analysis. Network analysis are also key strategies for understanding a culture. Network analysis can come in two major forms, either social networks or kinship networks. Kinship networks primarily involve charting out genealogies. Social networks primarily involve tracking who a person interacts with. An anthropologist will count the number of times or the length of interaction a subject has with different people. Anthropologists then use frequency of interaction to chart out relationships and power within a community. Anthropologists also take detailed field notes while conducting fieldwork. Field notes describe people, place, and events essential to research, or they might describe patterns and ideas that are emerged with the research questions. These methods, as well as many others that our anthropologists use, are taken together to produce the kind of thick description Gertz advocated. Mapping. Once an anthropologist has established a field site, one of the first steps is map making. Kind of. Anthropologists make maps of built environments. That is, the environments that human beings construct around them. Everything in their home, to their fields or hunting grounds, to make a cultural map of the building environments as anthropologists start to draw basic physical maps. However, the anthropologist will add cultural details such as who visited the buildings or places, what kind of activities take place, and so on and so forth. And now our mapping can be easily done through GPS technology, satellite imagery, or photography. Mapping isn't nearly as important as they end up putting on this portion. I mean, understanding some things is pretty important, but not to the extent they're talking. So, skills and perspectives, preparation and strategies of research are important, but there are certain skills and perspectives that anthropologists must have to be a good ethnographer that aren't easy to teach or learn. Quite simply, not all of us could do what Nancy Shepherd Hughes did when she went to live in an impoverished Brazilian shantytown. First and foremost, a good ethnographer must have a commitment to the core idea of cultural relativism. It took an amazing force of will for Shepherd Hughes to understand why women in her community of study did not always work to save the lives of the children. Her patience and determination help us to understand the key issues in Brazilian culture as well as an overall human psyche when faced with trauma. But many people would be uncomfortable if not outright unable to face these tragedies up close again and again. Until you reach your field site, you will never know how your conscience might be tried. Thus, it is imperative that we hold up a cultural relativism as a central idea of fieldwork. A good ethnographer must also be a good listener. To learn a new culture, you must talk with a great many people. You must truly hear what these people have to say and what they don't say, because many subjects, such as sexual practices or even simple family matters, may not be discussed in public. Remember, these conversations are often held in a language that is foreign to the anthropologists. The future emphasizes the need of patience and skilled listening on the part of the anthropologist. Field ethnography cannot occur on a schedule. If you seek to learn about daily life in a culture, you have to let the daily life happen. This can be a deep, frustrating practice. Very frustrating. When you have to wait for the right moment or simply let things happen around you. If you force members of the community to meet your schedule, you are taking them out of their culture and into yours. Finally, a good ethnographer has to learn to deal with the transformative effects of fieldwork. The intense interaction with a foreign culture will most definitely change you, and not everyone is comfortable with this change. Analysis. After a year spent living in the Trobriand Islands, Malinowski could have filled thousands of pages with details of the daily lives he witnessed. Generally speaking, no one would read that. Therefore, he would fail to make an overarching point. In order to present your ethnographic data to an audience, it has to be analyzed. Anthropologists do this by considering their findings from both an emic and etic perspective. They begin from the emic perspective, or understanding the local community on its own terms. They then compare and contrast the perspectives from an etic perspective, that is, an interpreting the culture from an outsider or the anthropologist's perspective. This overall process of comparing and contrasting fieldwork findings with the broader anthropological knowledge is called ethnology. So, what moral and ethical concerns guide anthropologists in their research and writing? Because of the nature of anthropology and working with people, ethics and morals are primarily a primary concern in a discipline. While there are many important issues that can be discussed, three principal topics arise. Do no harm. First among these concerns is the do no harm. Anthropologists should have their foremost concern to not put their subjects of the study in any form of danger. Our interest in studying and learning about cultures, not putting them at risk. This issue has been most heavily illuminated by the anthropologist's contentious relationship with military operations. As early as World War I and as recently as the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, military leaders employed or consulted with anthropologists. The military generally interested in knowing and understanding local populations for strategic reasons. Anthropologists are well suited to meet this need. However, by aiding the military, some feel that these anthropologists are putting the people they study at risk. That is, making use of anthropological knowledge for strategic or military gain is grave breach of the anthropological ethics. And yet, some are willing to participate in these projects. Okay. Then we have to obtain informed consent. It is imperative that our subjects agree to participate. Getting informed consent can be difficult, but it is most definitely necessary. Our primary research method, participant observation, requires establishing rapport within the community, which itself requires that our subjects clearly understand our project and willingly agree to participate in it. There are federal regulations in place that protect the human subjects in research. While these regulations were originally put in place for medical research, anthropology now holds themselves to the similar rigorous standards. When one studies a foreign culture, it is not always easy to explain why you have left home to live in this community. This makes informed consent all the more important. Finally, anthropologists take great care to ensure anonymity, particularly given the reality of increased globalization. It is likely that anthropologists' work may be available for the community of study to read. Informants could be greatly affected if their local community viewed the information they provided in a negative light. In order to achieve anonymity, anthropologists often change the names of people and places, while at the same time striving to retain authentic details. Qualitative versus quantitative. So this is another example of the difference between qualitative and quantitative. Anything that can use your five senses would definitely be qualitative. So what you can see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, what you touch, how it feels. Scientific, real hardcore data is quantitative. Both of them are needed and used within cultural anthropology. So, field notes and ethnology are definitely the written observations and reflections. This is analysis and comparing of ethnographic data across cultures. Another way to look at etic and emic. So etic is outsider's perspective. Emic is the insider's perspective. I really like this version. Starbucks, most definitely etic. Menu does not adapt to other countries. It's one standard menu all the way down the line. McDonald's, however, is emic because their menu changes depending on the country. They consider the natives' perspectives or tastes. I know recently McDonald's, or not that recently, a couple months ago, McDonald's started to do this thing where they would bring in different countries' top rated products. Pretty cool. Okay, informed consent. This is what an IRB looks like. They are extremely annoying and hard to get, but extremely important. Hopefully I'll talk about this a little bit more in the future. So, anonymity, definitely something that we try to strive for. We do this by changing the person's names and sometimes gender or combining characters together. So, concept checked. Williams suggests that fieldwork can be kind of, homework, a strategy for gathering information that will help anthropologists make informed decisions. Concept check number 2. The roots of anthropological fieldwork lie in C. The increased international movements of Europeans during the late 19th century. Number 3. A successful ethnographer needs excellent listening skills. B. In her book, Number Our Days, Barbara Meyerhoff demonstrated this concept. B. Being thrice born. And last one, having the people studied in an ethnography also write for the ethnography is an example of what type of concept? Polyvocality. So, when looking at writing your own discussion questions for the discussion board, look at these. What would you be willing to do as anthropological fieldwork? Why or why not? How would you be willing to do it? Why? After what you've learned so far this semester, do you think that anthropologists should work in conjunction with the military? Why or why not? Okay, so from here, go ahead and go to the discussion board and do your 2 questions and respond to a peer, and then go ahead and take the quiz. I will see you for chapter 4.